Hey everybody. So, as many of you know, I've been kind of looking for a Protestant to argue against these new positions that I've taken as I've, studied more and looked at history and have these what I would call truths and facts that I can't deny. Um, haven't been able to find any because most Protestants that I know aren't anti-Catholic. A lot of them are Anglican and Presbyterian and whatnot. Last night on Twitter, I don't know who this is, but I had retweeted Five Solas, who said, out of all the cults who debate certain doctrines of Christian faith, Roman Catholics have to be the most illogical, inadequate, and scripturally illiterate. I understand why they say they need Rome's help with the Bible. They're woefully incompetent to debate scripture. I mean, just a heck of a tweet, right? So many things wrong with it. So I said, he literally just said that every early church father is incompetent. And the claim is, on my end, that every church father was Catholic. And by Catholic, I don't mean 2024 Catholic. I mean historical Catholic, because there was no Orthodoxy or Catholicism at the time. It was Catholic. And I could argue that they hold, what Roman Catholic and Orthodoxy hold today is what they would hold then, and I can prove that. So he says, where did he say that? I'm having trouble finding it. I said, when you address the RCC or addressing much of the early church, which I think is obvious, much of is not the language of your original post. And then, we kind of go back and forth for a second. And I say, okay, I'll take on all of it. And I said, then he comes back and says there are many early church fathers who would not be Catholics if they were alive today. Weird claim. I said, can you name one? He said, St. Augustine. Ugh. Another claim. Would not be Catholic today. Bizarre. Tertullian, Origen, Athanasius, Cyprian. So Tertullian, Origen, to me, outside of historical context. So when Tertullian and Origen make theological claims, I kind of ignore it for the most part. But when they make historical claims, I would pay attention. That is, their comments on Mass and stuff like that I would pay attention to. But their comments on Genesis or, faith matters or morals, I would kind of disregard because they were heterodox to heretics at one point near the end. And then he says, issues include papal infallibility, purgatory, and several doctrines that seemingly deify Mary. These doctrines are antithetical to Scripture and developed well after the ECFs. Again, so claim number one, St. Augustine would not be Catholic today, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then these claims here are antithetical to Scripture and developed well after ECF. So general anti-Catholic statements. The bizarre ones to me are the claim that many would not be Catholic today. I don't know how you can claim that. And then St. Augustine. Two bizarre claims. So I said this should be fun, and I'm being lighthearted about it because it's like, this is fun to me. I'm sorry, I am sick, by the way, so if I need to take a breather, that's why. I said, I'm working on the assumption you've read Augustine, so what doctrines does he deny that the Catholic faith holds today? And then I mentioned the Tertullian Origin thing. He said, I sound unhinged for saying it's be fun. Oh, okay. I'm not interested in enabling whatever fantasy you're orchestrated in your head. I've already provided several doctrine issues that these men would deny. Right. And so, again, I'm asking, can you show me why they would deny these, how they deny these? I said, can you show me where they deny these things, please? And then I made a mistake. I said, especially immaculate, which Calvin, Luther, and all others held to, which down here I end up saying, sorry, my mistake, I meant perpetual virginity. So, this was 10 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night trying to get my kid to bed, then 10 o'clock at night later on. So didn't have all my wits about me, but that's fine. I'm happy to admit when I'm wrong. So I said, can you show me where Augustine, Cyprian, and Athanasius deny said doctrines? And he says, Calvin affirms it, trying to divert. And I said, sorry, I was wrong. He said most of these doctrines were invented in the 19th century. So the papacy wasn't. So why list doctrines they couldn't deny or affirm? Like, it seems weird to say, hey, they would deny these, and then come around and say, well, they can't deny them, proving my point. No, they can't deny something that they didn't know of or wasn't doctrine at the time. But they were all theological notions at the time, which we can prove. So I said the papacy wasn't. So why list doctrines they couldn't deny or affirm? Then state bishops of the church, who were also monks for a time, weren't Catholic. So again, I kind of reaffirm the position of, like, it's a little bizarre to say that these people weren't Catholic. They were bishops of the church. Bishops are, if you're Anglican or Orthodox or Catholic, these are your positions. And they were also monks. Many of them were monks. So I said, not a single scholar agrees with your assessment, which is true. I'm still waiting for him to approve the assertion. To which he kind of diverts. So you agree that the RCC of today is fundamentally different from what the church existed in the first 5 centuries. I said, I disagree with the qualifier, meaning fundamentally different. If you're asking whether or not doctrine has been teased out from councils, yes, of course, that's the purpose, to rid them of heresy, then setting in doctrine, firm belief. I said, Mass is 90% the same. I mean, literally. Then he says, I argue that the Reformation itself is proof of change. I didn't really understand this at first. I said, how is the Reformation proof of fundamental change? I said, the Council of Trent reverted to older stances to appease the Lutheran discourse, exposing Luther's true motive, which wasn't theological at all, but personal, which is just historical fact. And then he says, how is the Reformation proof of change? It was a split of the church. I'm like, but that's not change. I said, I get down here. I said, basically, just because someone branches off and makes their own church, that doesn't fundamentally change the Roman Catholic Church. Nothing about the Roman Catholic Church changed in that regard. So I said, you asserted the Catholic Church changed from the time of the doctrinal inceptions. The Protestant Reformation wasn't a schism. It was the same thing as the Nestorian heresy. The second Luther declined working with the church. A schism is what the East and West is, not a cult branch off. So the Protestant denomination combined are all well larger than the RCC. So if you want to label anyone a cult branch off, it should be RCC. So for some reason, in his mind, cults are determined by numbers. I don't really understand how that works. Which I explained here. I said cults are branches of historical organizations. When speaking religiously of cults, it's the sects that hold to heterodox or heretical notions based off the original, i.e. Protestants. They are a sect of the original. And then he says, you need help. I pray that God grants you to see the truth. The RCC stands condemned because it has universally rejected the precepts of God, which I didn't even challenge because that's just, absurd. But also stands condemned by who? Him? So he's the arbiter? And if he wants to claim that God condemns it, I would, again, he must be a voice for God because God has yet to condemn the Roman Catholic Church. And I said, you're just saying things. You haven't backed a single claim, which he hasn't. Please read through this thread and embrace your stubborn ignorance. I just walked through the entire thread. So if any of you guys see my stubborn ignorance on this, please help me. And I mean that genuinely. So I questioned that, and I said, I never burdened the early church fathers with today's doctrines. And then he goes, how about a debate? I'm ready on short notice. I said, okay, how about this? You claim that Augustine wasn't or wouldn't be Catholic. Do you think he'd adhere to the Westminster? Do you think that other bishops and monks would adhere to that of the early church, like Athanasius, Clement of Rome, Ignatius of Antioch? I just want to make sure that I'm getting this. Okay. I don't affirm ECFs. That's a Catholic thing. I affirm Scripture alone. So there it is. There's like the button issue, right? So I said, got it. Whose interpretation of Scripture? There is no need for an interpreter concerning these primary matters. God has made it plain. I mean, my guy, first off, I go one way with this. I could have gone a million ways with this. If there's no need for an interpreter, God has made it plain. Why did the whole of the early church spend their time writing apologetics and claiming the authority that they did through apostolic succession to back up their apologetic. I mean, he mentions Athanasius. Has he read Athanasius? Mentions Augustine and Cyprian, both of them. I mean, I'm just confused. So I said, why did reformers disagree? And still to this day on core essentials. Careful with your posts, brother. Slander is a serious offense. Oh, this is a reference to something I'll show at the end, which is when he says I need mental care and help because, well, I don't know. He just apparently likes to say those things. He says, plus I could post the entire thread if I wanted. I mean, I'm literally going through the entire thread. So I said, please do answer the above question. If someone is reformed but then disagrees with core issues of Reformed dogma, they're no longer reformed. So your question is based on a false pretense. I said, that's historically inaccurate, so not a false pretense. Anyone not Orthodox or Catholic who affirms Scripture alone is an offshoot of Protestant theology. Beza and the Remonstrants were both Reformed. And this is a historical fact again. I said, so which? Westminster, Scott, Belgic, etc., all Reformed. He says, the Westminster Confession of Faith is the only confession you listed. What? So I go, so you're suggesting the other confessions aren't adherent to the one true confession as like a play off how Catholics say, the one true church. That was a joke for myself. He said, no, it's the only actual confession. The others you mentioned are commentaries and interpretations of various confessions and creeds, which is, again, a very bizarre claim. I said, what are you talking about? The Belgic is a confession which disagrees with the Westminster. Both are Reformed. So the Belgic, Helvetic, Heidelberg, all those predate the Westminster, so they can't be commentaries on the Westminster. So not a commentary on Westminster, but commentary on Reformed dogma. So kind of changing the conversation there, but I said incorrect. These are all confessions of their locations of churches. So I'm confused why he doesn't know this. But then he said, to my knowledge, the Westminster Confession essentially replaced Scots. However, I was ignorant of the Belgic Confession being widespread prior to this convo. So right here is where I begin to realize he's never read the Reformed history, which begs me to ponder if he's ever read Augustine, Cyprian, Athanasius, and otherwise, which I would just venture to guess no. I said, knowing that the Reformed confessions and theologians disagreed, who has the correct interpretation? Spins it again. Knowing that papal infallibility disagrees with Scripture, which interpretation have you been using? Debate me live, it'll be fun. Okay, so doesn't answer my question. So I just, I say, okay, how does papal infallibility disagree? The burden of proof would lie on you. I said, you said they disagree. The burden of proof is yours. The burden of proof wouldn't be mine if I made a claim upon it. I haven't made a claim yet. If you notice, I haven't made a single claim. I've corrected his claims, corrected his stance, and then he just shifts questions around. He doesn't answer my questions. He just shifts questions around. So he says, Peter was not infallible. He was condemned by Scripture and corrected by Paul. Jesus himself warns against calling anyone else, irrelevant. In Acts 17, the Bereans are commended for testing Paul against Scripture, revealing it as the ultimate standard. A standard. It never says ultimate standard. It says a standard, and it's the standard they had. And guess what? It was the Old Testament, not the New Testament. So I said, got it. So do you understand the stance of papal infallibility? Because apparently he thinks that anything the Pope says goes. I said, no Pope is infallible in all they do or say. That should be obvious. Therefore, the above examples of Peter, Paul, etc. aren't relevant. So I want to sit on this for a second because it's important. He says Peter was not infallible, and Paul was not infallible. So in order to maintain logical consistency here with what he's saying about papal infallibility in Peter and Paul, he needs to say that he's in a tight spot, because if you say that someone in authority can't hand down law, which we'll get to in a second, or doctrine, then Peter and Paul can't. Either they were acting infallibly when they were speaking doctrinally, or they weren't. So are they or are they not? And if you say, well, it's Scripture, so what makes it Scripture? Either they were speaking in authority or they weren't on the matters of faith and morals and doctrine. So if they were speaking in that way, and you say that what they said is infallible, so then Peter and Paul were, right here, infallible when speaking on this topic. Like, you can't have it both ways. It's either they were infallible when speaking about doctrines and teachings on the morals of faith, or they weren't. Which one is it? I'm going to say that they were, because they had authority to do so, as presented by Jesus as he breathed on the apostles, and then presented himself to Paul. Which, by the way, Paul makes the argument of why he's an apostle. I gotta check my screen brighter. There's this dimming thing. Oh, that's really annoying. Okay, anyways. Oops. There we go. So, you can't have it both ways. Either Peter was not infallible, and we can't trust anything he wrote down, because in order for it to be scripture, it must be infallible. And if Peter said it, then it's infallible. So it's like, pick your lane. And by the way, all we're saying about the papal infallibility is when the Pope speaks, which he's only done 3 times in the history of papal infallibility. It's about faith and morals. So it says, if he comes out and says, "Hey, abortion, yeah, that's doctrinally incoherent and speaking infallibly," I'd be like, "Yep, okay, got it," because it aligns with Scripture. Anyways, so he says they're not explicit proofs. And if you guys didn't get this, what I'm saying here, I want to spend more time on that. I might write an article on it. They're not explicit proofs against papal infallibility, but proofs of man's infallibility, evidence against papal infallibility. And it's much more that you have in support of papal infallibility. He says, good night. I don't even understand this, but proofs of man's infallibility. Yeah, Peter and Paul were wrong at points. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. What's your point? Again, papal infallibility doesn't mean the Pope comes up. Like, not everything. 99% of what Francis has said probably is not infallible. Now, this is where James White would bolster in and say, well, how do you determine what's infallible? I'm going to divert to Jimmy Akin on that one, but it's pretty apparent what's infallible and what's not. And we can spend more time on that if people want me to. By the way, infallible is a word taken drastically above its nature. Maybe I do need to spend time on it. I said, but it's straw. And I did this a lot too when I would debate Catholics as a Protestant. I tried to say, I said, that's not even on the Moses level, which Moses made binding laws. So Moses, this is what I was going to get to, is Moses bound Israel with his own laws that were not direct from God, and they obeyed them as if they were from God. So he says, you keep trying to build rapport with me, citing similarities, attempting blah, blah, blah. And he, once again, attacks my character, which I haven't said anything about his character. But on this, we have a sub-thread, which I'm going to show here. Moses made no laws. He had no divine authority. So I say Moses made no laws. Okay, interesting take on the Old Testament. Alert the Jews because they'd argue that's a false claim. So with Jesus, Deuteronomy 1, 24, Numbers 27, John 7, Matthew 19. So Jesus reflects these and says, Moses gave you this law. It doesn't say God gave you this law, and you can look this up in the Old Testament. Moses made these laws, specifically on divorce, and a couple other things. And he acted as judge over the tribes, over the people of Israel. So, at worst, the Pope is reflecting Moses and what Moses did, which is also, to me, a positive thing. So then he goes on, the fact that you assume I believe Moses had divine authority exposes your ignorance concerning Protestant theology. 1, I never said that he had divine authority. I don't know why he asserts that. And also, I don't know how that relates to Protestant theology at all. because I don't know a single Protestant theologian, and I know many of them, and I can communicate with many of them just to affirm this, that would say Moses didn't make laws that Israel is bound to. It's very bizarre. This guy's taking very bizarre positions. He says, I'm not sure that you were, or what you thought you were, but it wasn't reformed. If you argued against Catholics with the ability you've shown here, I'm not surprised you're now Catholic, meaning I'm not good at debating. Which I never made a claim to being good at debating, but we're 3 hours into this, and he has yet to back a single claim. And then he just goes on, modern day Pharisees, Pope is not special. It's like, not only did I prove him wrong on the Belgic Confessions, not only did I think I tweeted somewhere, I said all the proven wrong on Moses, proven wrong on the Belgic Confessions, proven wrong on Jesus, proven wrong historically many times. And he just diverts to a new thing. And he wants me to debate him live. I'm like, why would I debate someone like this? This is just absurd. It'd be a waste of my flipping time. So this is the best I've gotten from a Protestant thus far, which, not great. I wish it was more. Yeah. Just seeing if there's anything else worth noting here. I mean, we talked about the Didache real quick. I've never heard anyone refer to the Didache as early church catechism. It refers to itself as the early church catechism, which means you've never read it. It's just frustrating. Like, don't bring Augustine, Cyprian, all these people up if you've never read them. Why do people do that? I mean, it's an internet thing. If this was, again, like in person, there's no chance. It's just frustrating. Anyways, wanted to share that with you. And if you guys have questions on anything that I said or he said, or if I was wrong in any case, please alert me. Yeah. Thank you.